Welcome to my podcast, Therese Makes History. My name is Therese Sweeney. I live in Berry in New South Wales and I'm bringing you Season 1 of the Dairy Lane Project. This region's primary industry throughout the 20th century was dairying. Many families dairy farmed. I'm engaging descendants of families that farmed the lanes between Bomaderry to Berry. For the past 5 episodes, I've been in the meadow and the high terrain of Meroo Meadow. Today I'm in the flats, the lands of the meadow, in Meroo Rd on the corner of the highway. I'm focusing on the Pheeney family, P-H-E-E-N-E-Y, who farmed from the early 20th century and are still on some of those parcels today. Daughter Pearl Pheeney, now known as Pearl Biggs through marriage, is my guest. The Pheeneys are related to the Vaughans from Fletchers Lane and Bolong through their paternal grandmother. Evelyn Vaughan was born in 1885 and she married Fredrick Pheeney, who was born in 1884. They got married at All Saints Church in Nowra in 1911. And they celebrated their wedding at Evelyn's father's home, William Vaughan, in Bomaderry. The Vaughans and the Pheeneys came from Bega. William Vaughan was the first to secure land, leaving Bega early. He farmed at Bolong until his death in 1932. He knew a lot about draft horses and was involved in the agricultural societies. His sons continued farming in the meadow and in Fletchers Lane. After Evelyn and Fredrick married, they returned to Bega. Later, travelling up to secure land at Meroo in the early 20th century. Grandmother Evelyn travelled by horse and sulky whilst pregnant with Pearl's dad, Eric. Fred Pheeney, meanwhile, drove cattle up from Bega on horseback. Pearl's father is Eric Pheeney. Pearl's mother is Rita Rutledge. Rita's father, Jack Rutledge, married Ida Devitts in 1917 at Berry Methodist Church. The family moved to Pullman Street, Berry, in 1920. Their daughter Rita Mary Rutledge was born in 1922 and Pearl's mother married Fredrick Pheeney's son Eric. Prior to being married, Rita spent some time on the Devitts farm Sunnyside with Albert and Grace. Jack Rutledge's grandparents were William Rutledge and Eleanor Fletcher, who married on the 11th of March in 1864. His mother Margaret never married and was William and Eleanor's only child. To finish, Pearl thinks a single young female, Pheeney, from Ireland migrated here at the age of 16. Her last name was spelt F-E-E-N-E-Y, but that has evolved to what we know as today, P-H-E-E-N-E-Y. Thanks for coming in today, Pearl.
My pleasure.
Tell me, what year were you born and where were you born?
I was born in 1944. I was born in Nowra, in the hospital in Bridge Road.
So was that a private hospital?
No, General Hospital.
Where were your parents living?
My parents were living at Maylands on Meroo Rd, Meroo Meadow, and I lived there till I was 23.
So we might just go through your parents' full names and if you know their year of birth and if they've passed the year they passed.
My father was Eric Mervyn Pheeney. He was born in 1920, the month of August. My mother was Rita Mary Rutledge. She was born in the Rutledge family home in Berry on the corner of the Old Prince's Highway and Pullman's Lane in 1922.
Where was your father born?
My father was born in Bomaderry at the end of Fletchers Lane in the house with help from the family.
Okay. So how many uncles did you have?
My father had, oldest brother was Uncle Carlton. There was Uncle Les. Auntie Gwen, was the eldest child, and Dad was the youngest. Mum came from Bury, and her siblings were Uncle Alec Rutledge, Uncle Arthur Rutledge, then there was Mum, then there was Uncle Ray Rutledge and Auntie May Rutledge.
Do you recall when your father secured the land at Meroo and what happened around that?
Dad and Mum leased the farm of Dad's father, Fredrick Pheeney, in 1943 through to 1957, when they were able to purchase the farm. They worked the farm from 1957 through to 1988, when it was sold.
Okay, so how much land? How big was the...
We only had a small farm. It was 60 acres, and we had a dry run up the highway towards Nowra, and we had 30 acres there.
Which seemed to be common for some. They had a dry run.
Yes. Most people had dry runs, and our dry run happened to be next door to the Mullers from Meroo.
What does a dry run mean?
We put beef cattle on the dry runs and waiting for cattle to calve. We also had a lot of bush, which we used the timber for fences and firewood for both the dairy and the house. There was 5 of us, but 3 of us always got up to milk at 4 o'clock in the morning before going to school, and then we'd come home and do paddock work. Dad always tried to milk around 30 to 35, and we used to have at least 20 dry cows, and then you'd have your calves, and they would differ in number from time to time.
Did they calve it in a particular season, or...?
No, not really, from what I can recall.
What type of cows did you have?
We had, as kids we called them black and whites, and they are Herefords. Towards the end of milking, we introduced some jerseys so that we could get our butter fats and cream levels up in our milk production.
So your grandfather owned the land while you were helping?
My grandfather did own the land.
Do you remember your grandmother on the property?
Not my grandmother, only my step-grandmother.
Okay, so will we explore what happened with your grandmother?
My grandmother, after the birth of her children, developed a thyroid. And back in the late 30s, they had no idea of the operation. So she had to go to Sydney for it, and she passed away while she was having the operation very suddenly in 1941.
So you didn't know her?
So I didn't know her. There was only 3 grandchildren born before she passed, and the eldest was 1.5.
And when did your grandfather remarry, and who?
My grandfather remarried in September 23rd, 1943, and he married Gertie Lee, who apparently was a housekeeper at one of the Mullers' houses in Meroo.
So do you recall ever making butter back in that time?
I certainly do, and not that we liked homemade butter, but that was no choice. That's what we were given for many years. And separating the cream in the dairy so that we could do cakes and sweets, or puddings back in those days they were called, for many years.
And how was the cream being separated?
By a hand separator, and we had to turn it many, many times.
So who was the first in the family to go to the local school?
I was the first to go to Meroo Public School, followed by my sister Elaine, my sister Evelyn, my brother Alan. And I think my younger brother John may have attended for a very short time before the school closed, and he went on to Bomaderry Public School.
Who were some of your classmates that you remember, or the farms there at that time? What year did you go to school?
So I went to school around 49.
Yep.
And classmates was Pam Shepherd, who happened to live down the end of Fletchers Lane where Dad was born. Margaret Wiley from near Wiley's Creek. Ian Callaghan. Frances Marshall. Marie Boxall. Judith Wiley. Yvonne Shepherd.
Who was your teacher, do you recall?
Yes, Mr. Debenham. And he was a teacher there for many, many years. My youngest brother, had Mr. Redman. He was the next teacher to follow on. But during our years at Meroo, we had a second teacher come, and her name was Miss Nolene Walsh, and she lived at Jasper's Brush. We had 2 classrooms, which was a big school for a country village.
Did it have a hall?
Yes, we had a community hall. It was across the road from the school. I can't recall the year, but it was removed to Shoalhaven Heads to be the public hall in their village.
What did Fletchers Lane look like, and who were some of the people that were farming when you were a young girl? Were we talking dirt roads?
We certainly are dirt roads, and we crisscrossed the whole way down the lane with the biggest potholes that could fit a tractor in to miss the potholes when we were children, and for a number of years. Always got graded, and we had floods within the first month after grading. When I was a child, the first house on the left was Dad's cousins, Mr. and Mrs. Les Vaughan, and the second farm was Mr. and Mrs. Limry, and over the rail line was Mr. and Mrs. Shepherd, and their farm hands lived in the other house were Mr. and Mrs. Ozzie Gardner. I would say it was possibly Ozzie and Doris. The Limrys were Egder and Irma, and Vaughans were Les and Rainey.
Did you all have a similar size property?
Similar, but the other 3 farms were around the 100 acres.
So was everyone growing crops?
Yes, we grew corn and sacchaline mainly for the silos. We grew lucerne, ryegrass, oats, and a few other different varieties of grass to make hay mainly.
Are you manual or are you on mechanised tractors here?
We were on very manual. We started with draft horses.
So you remember the draft horses?
I remember the draft horses pulling the ploughs and
the slide?
And the slide.
At harvest time?
Harvest time we cut the corn by a corn cutter by hand and put it on the slide. And the best fun was sitting on top of the corn or the sacchaline, going back to the silos with my grandfather and father.
And how high were you up there? Was it packed high?
It was packed about 5 feet, but felt like 15 when we were young.
You talked about flooding. Were you all in the same boat there, literally?
On our farm, we had floods coming across from the creek, which was Tullian Creek, and would come through our dairy, so it could be 2 to 3 feet deep, and down to the house, and it reached the top of the steps of the house. So we were lucky. It never came through the house, but through the garages it did, and the machinery sheds. One day I was asked to go to the road gate to close the gate because the bull paddock fence was washed away. as I was going along the barbed wire fence and putting my hand on the post, something slippery came off the post, and it was at least 6 to 7 foot tiger snake that swam up and down the paddock in the creek, in the floods, and very frightening to watch. One of many snakes that we had experiences with.
How did you feel when you realised you'd touched the tiger snake? What was your immediate reaction?
Scream. Certainly scream, jumped back past the snake, and thankfully he missed me, and Dad just went after the snake.
In the floods, and when there's no floods, there are snakes.
Certainly is. This particular snake was at least 3 to 4 feet out of the water and fierce because he had been disturbed. We had at least 3 tiger snakes come into the house. We had snakes in the dairy, snakes in the hay sheds. And where we live now is still on our old property, and we have had, in one day, 3 snakes around our house and numerous other ones. Had 2 little baby snakes come into our family room. We don't know how or where they got in, but they just appeared in the middle of the family room floor.
So when you talk about snakes, there's the tiger snake. How does it arc? Does it arc up like a brown snake? Yes.
Certainly does, yes. Very vicious.
You were lucky.
Very scary. Mum was actually feeding my young brother John, and the snake came into the kitchen one day, and naturally she jumped up onto the table because Dad was nowhere, and just had to wait till the snake disappeared.
What other sorts of snakes are common to that area?
Mainly brown, red belly, black and tiger, and lots of them.
Do you still see the tigers?
Occasionally we do, not as often through the summer as we used to, thankfully.
You handled the snakes, the family handled them themselves?
Yes, we did. Tried to get a snake catcher, and he was hours and hours away. So I finally got a man, and he came out, and through brooms we managed to get the baby snakes out of the house, thankfully. When we were quite young, Mum and Dad showed cattle at the Nowra show and came home to milk. So my 2 sisters and I sat in a paddock in the long grass. And while they were milking, my youngest sister was bitten on the toe with either a deadly spider or a snake when she had to be rushed to the doctors at the time. Just had a sore toe for a few weeks. Very fortunate. We got into trouble for being in the long grass.
What did you grow? What type of grasses?
Well, mainly we had lucerne, millet and oats and ryegrass, the main ones I can remember. Mum and Dad bought a baler early in their marriage, which meant that we had to pitchfork the hay into the baler, and Mum mainly was the one at the back pressing the bales and tying the bales with wire, so her hands were damaged. Then they updated and we got a massive Ferguson baler which baled right through. So we travelled to different farms, from Broughton village in the north to the Shoalhaven River, and then up to Waggamire doing silage and haymaking. At the time we had up to 7 tractors, so we're all on the road, and we were known as the Pheeney's travelling circus. And thankfully in those days we could get away with young drivers, but had to have our machinery all registered.
But the police would turn a blind eye to the 14-year-old?
Yes, we were very fortunate.
So you had your own business?
Not really, but we certainly did, going around the farms for very little
What would you charge?
I think they started around 5 shillings a bale, but it was very little money that the farmers paid.
Because they had little money?
Because they had little money. And Mum and Dad were very charitable workers in many organisations, so that's how we helped each other out.
The teenagers are on the tractors.
Yes, we were. There was 4 of the 5 children on tractors, and Mum and Dad. And Mum usually had the car or the station wagon, and she would have a hay rake or a blower for the silos with her, and the thermoses and our lunch. It's like a big funnel with a motor on and shoots the grass up into the silos.
Oh, okay. You all had a silo, the farms?
Most farms had one silo, but there was a few that had both silos.
Did you have 2 or 1 silo?
We just had one silo, but we used to do pits in the dry creek beds with harvest in that.
So that was when there was drought, was there, or were they dry beds?
They were dry beds because they converted the creek straight down to stop the flooding coming through the house and dairy.
So what creek?
There was Tullian Creek at Meroo Meadow. It was only a small creek but held a lot of water in floods coming off the mountain.
When did that occur, that they turned back the tide? What did they do? How did they do that?
Well, the main road was upgraded as such, and they converted the creek to go straight through our place, so it flooded further down on the flats. And there was many upgrades over the years, but the main one would have been around the 70s and then 80s for us, that improved our area for flooding.
So would they run drains under the underground or something to do that? How did they stop the water?
No, they actually just put in graders and forests, and then they had the diggers bucket to change the course of the creek and block the original curve in the creek. So that became our dry beds for our hay pits. And the hay pits were put down with molasses every so many feet, a couple of feet, and we'd have another layer of molasses. So the smell was quite strong when we were feeding the cattle. You put your harvest down, and then about 2 feet depth, and then you molasses, and you may go 2 or 3 feet, but it was, and topped it with molasses again.
So how did you get the air out of it?
We didn't need to.
The molasses was heavy enough?
Yes. And then sometimes, and we'd cover it with black plastic and tyres on top, like you see in different farms today. And we did a lot around the 60s and 70s.
Was that for the winter feed?
For the winter feed, yes. We used to mix it with pollard and bran in the stalls with the cattle, and other times just straight onto the paddocks.
Did you ever use chaff cutters in the field?
No, we had a chaff cutter in our stalls and hand-fed the corn and the sacchaline through that up into the silos.
Any injuries with that wire?
Mum's hands were terrible, but no injuries, thankfully.
You had a walk-through dairy?
Yes, we had a walk-through dairy, and being only a small farm, we had 3 sets of 2 milking machines, so there were 6 cattle going through at a time. After the cows had the machines on them, we always hand-stripped the last of the milk out. When the power went off, Dad was able to hook up with the tractor and give us the power for the machines to work. I don't recall milking a herd by hand, and thankfully I didn't have to. Our job after milking was feeding the calves, of course, and we used to have at least a dozen calves at a time. We enjoyed it, except in the wet weather and the electrical storms were my main concerns. Not glamorous with the weather, but the life itself on a farm is the best way to bring children up.
How were the winds through where you were?
Well, Meroo is known for westerly winds, which are very, very strong. And there's a strip between Meroo Rd and Abernethy's Creek that really are a very strong wind area. In saying that, where we live now, we have lost 3 old pine trees that were close to 150 to 160 years old, and a dozen cypress pines in the last 4 years.
From the wind?
From the wind and the roadworks. When they did the new highway recently, they decided that we should have our hedge taken down, which they did, and then 3 years later told us that we didn't need to have that hedge taken down because they had changed their plans because they dug in front of our place, which was the main water supply going to Berry, and realised they couldn't go any further with their plans on our side of the road. So they, after digging twice, they moved their plans to the opposite side of the road. So that was the water and the power lines and the electricity was all interrupted during that time.
What are we talking about? Like regular interruptions?
For our side personally with the phones, and our daughter has Meadow Swim School next door, we were without our landlines for 3 months and no sooner had it reconnected and it was out for 6 weeks. And that happened a few times over the 3 years. Most inconvenient when you're trying to run a business. Originally it went to the Berry Township. I'm not sure how much further it went, but originally Berry Township.
And what was the water source? Was it town water?
It was town water.
Okay. And you were on town water?
When the pipes first went in, no. We had to wait for it to be connected because it was for the township of Berry and coming from Nowra.
So you weren't prioritised?
Not originally, but then we did go on to town water. We had tanks and wells for many years.
Oh, you dug the wells?
They were on the property before I was ever born.
Do you know who your grandfather bought the land from?
Yes. He bought the land from Fletchers, I believe, a David Fletcher. And
you want to talk about him a bit? You've got some information.
I do have very little. There was 2 brothers, and one bought our farm and one bought Uncle Fred Vaughan, and they farmed between 1919 and 1927 on the farms. I believe that David Fletcher bought the farm at the end of Fletcher's Lane when my grandfather was leaving there, and he bought Maylands. Fletcher's Lane became Fletcher's Lane through the 2 brothers living on the 2 properties close to the end of the lane. Our boundary ran right to the corner of the lane, and that's where the Fletchers name came from.
And what about Abernethy's? What do you know about the Abernethy's, and where was their farm?
Abernethy's farm was on Princes Highway, where Abernethy's Creek comes across the highway.
Did you know the family yourself?
I did. I knew the younger family, which were older than me, of course. And the Abernethy family arrived in Australia approximately 200 years ago. And William and Marion Abernethy purchased the farm at Meroo in the early 20th century, and I presume that's where
When the lands were for sale.
For sale. They had 4 children, actually 4 sons, Bruce, Roy, Ken and Jack, all helped their parents on the farm, and Jack worked the farm for many, many years until he met a local lady, Eileen Soper from Camberwarra, and they worked both farms and walked their cattle between Camberwarra and Meroo every few months so that they could work both farms. And they actually retired to the Camberwarra farm and sold Meroo farm, who's now purchased by Paul Duncan, who grew up in Meroo. His parents were Keith and Ursula Duncan, and they lived next door to the Meroo school. And it was nice for him to be able to buy a farm and still live at Meroo Meadow.
So the Abernethy's farm, is that the farm over that we see as we're going up the highway past Meroo Rd, the next little silo? Is that the farm we're talking about?
Yes, it is.
And do you know how many acres that is?
At a guess, I would say around 40 acres. And I remember when Jack was dairying and our milk carrier put the price up for a can of milk to be delivered to Horlicks in Bomaderry by a halfpenny, and Jack refused to pay. So he took his 2 cans of milk, morning and night, on his motorbike to the milk factory.
And how did it look on the motorbike?
Ridiculous. Of course, he was going very, very slow and determined to do this because he wasn't paying the small fee to have the milk carrier. And he did it for many, many times.
Do you remember who the carriers were? Or?
Yes.
And what the route was? Do you know that?
We were the first on the route. The carrier I remember was Ross Legg. We're talking about 1945. We were the first, and they went around to Wiley's Creek, calling on all the farms. Then they went up Marshall's Lane and across to Bell's Lane, virtually the area that Ross Legg had for his milk carrier. Then we had Jack Atfield, who also lived in Bomaderry for many years, until we went into bulk milk carrier, which we didn't do ourselves. Dad decided it was time to go to beef cattle. Because we were small farmers and the cost of bulk milk equipment was just out of the limits for most farmers. Nowadays, the smallest herd that I know of is 350, going up to 1,200. So therefore, it's a different story with cattle these days.
Did you find that your family was struggling for money?
We were able to grow vegetables. We had a large orchard and we had our chooks and ducklings and we used to be able to swap with family, friends, neighbours, which helped each other out. We'd swap veggies. We did a lot of preserving of fruits, made a lot of jams and pickles, which was always nice.
What about your bread and things like that? Cakes? You made your cakes?
My mum was a good cook for cakes and slices and puddings. The bread we bought from Kylie's in Bomaderry, and that was quite often brought out on the milk carrier and delivered to most farmers.
Okay, do you remember the train?
Yes, I remember the trains from Bomaderry because they blew their whistle right along the straight at Meroo, Jasper's Brush, to the different farms. And it was the old coke trains then, when we were children, always with the black smoke when you were near the railway line to wave to the train drivers.
And you get a bit of soot, would you?
Oh, yes, well and truly. We'd come back with black faces sometimes, or most times.
What was the township look like? Was it all dirt roads?
Yes, Meroo Road was dirt, and most of the lanes were dirt back then. It wasn't until possibly the 60s where we started to see narrow bitumen.
And no footpaths?
Certainly no footpaths, and still isn't in the dairying district.
So you'd be walking on the road?
walking on the road or walking near the boundaries of fences. As children, we were picked up in the mornings by Mr. Red Shepherd and taken to school, but of course afternoons was milking time, so we'd walk home by the road, by the highway.
What did the highway look like?
The highway was very narrow, not a lot of potholes, surprisingly, but little traffic.
Not many cars?
Not a lot of cars.
Any sulkies and horses?
Yes, we had an old man that came up Meroo Rd in his horse and sulky every week, and he came over to Bury to see his family, and he was called Mr. Parish. When we were walking to school, it was rather scary at times when Mr. Shepherd was unavailable, and one morning my sisters Elaine, Evelyn and I were walking up the highway and noticed a swagman sitting under the pine tree at the top of the hill. As I'm the eldest and usually scared of everything, we cut down through Muller's corn paddock and came up around near the Meroo church. In the meantime, the teacher was worried about us and phoned our parents. Mum and Dad had no idea yet, but once they saw the swagman sitting at the top of the hill under the tree, they knew that I would take another route to school. We often had swagmen calling at our place because we were close to the highway, and they'd have like dog bones from the butchers and ask Mum to cook the bones for them.
It's hard.
Oh, yes.
Marrow broth or something?
Very little meat left on bones for dogs, which they enjoyed because that was their food. Just travelling and walk for miles and miles and miles up and down the highway. Occasionally you would see the same swagman come in with his bones, usually his tin mug for a cup of tea. And if you had a scone, he'd be even happier.
So let's go to the story you were talking about from Bega.
It was my father's parents, and they left Willumla with Grandma in the car with the 3 children and heavily pregnant, and grandfather walked the cattle from Willumla to Fletchers Lane. On the way, Grandma came through a creek and blew a tyre, heavily pregnant with my father, so they had to wait for grandfather to catch up to them with the cattle, and he repaired the tyre and set them on their way to the farm at the end of Fletchers Lane in Bomaderry. Took grandfather 6 days to bring the cattle up the narrow bush and dirt track highway that we now call Prince's Highway. Arriving there with their cattle and their draft horses, they settled there for a short time. Dad was born there, and he was a few months old when they moved to Maylands. When they moved to Maylands, Dad was walking at 6 months old and was out in the garden when the old draft horse nudged the leather strap off the post, and Dad naturally went out into the paddock, and thankfully it had been very, very wet and muddy, and the draft horse pushed Dad over and trod on the middle of his back, which was very, very small at 6 months old. Until the day he died, he still had the scar which grew with him over the years on the centre of his back. Very lucky man, and the only thing that saved him was the mud.
Was his back damaged?
Only for the scarring. His mother and his auntie both said he was just thick with mud, and that's what saved him.
So when your grandfather was droving the cattle, was he on horseback?
Yes, grandfather was on horseback, and I believe there was another man with him, but no name has been recorded.
So you remember stock horses around the place?
I do on a lot of farms. We mainly had a couple of draft horses.
You mentioned that you showed cattle.
We did show for a short time in both Berry and Nowra, but because of other commitments, that only lasted a few years.
Do you know any ribbons?
We did get ribbons, but I can't recall the name of the cattle, but I know we did get ribbons.
Did you have a stud name?
we always went under Maylands.
Was that your name you gave it, or did that you inherited that name?
I think my grandfather named it because Grandma's second name was May, so I think that's where it came from.
Did the floods improve after they redirected the flow?
Certainly did, yes, made a big difference. It was our lower flats on our boundary that carried most of the water onto the Vaughans, onto the Limreys and the Chepets, and then out onto the Bolong flats.
So you had a dry cow run?
We used to walk the dry cows from Maylands up to our dry run, which was about, back then they would tell you it was 1.5 miles. And we had to do it at a certain time. We had to apply for a licence to take the cattle on the roads. That was issued by the local council.
You knew the Abernethys. Were there other farmers on the northern side of the highway?
There were. There was Mr. and Mrs. Tom Muller, who was related to the Muller families.
Where were they farming?
They were farming opposite us up on the little hill before you go up the hill to Meroo Church. I can't recall much detail because I was so young, but then we had a family, Mr. and Mrs. Artie Hearn, connected with Hearn and Reed, I think, had business in Bomaderry. Reed and Hearn, sorry. Their son-in-law and daughter ran the farm for many years as a dairy farm, and they had 4 children. Apart from the RTA, I'm not sure who's living on that property at the moment.
I suppose the highway's changed a bit, has it?
Highway has certainly changed. It did have a very sharp corner at Meroo Rd and the junction of Princes Highway, and many, many accidents over the years. But since the redirection of the highway has improved, the safety has improved too.
Did you go to regular church, and what was your church?
Yes, Mum and Dad were Christians. Dad was born Anglican and Mum was born Methodist, and they were both churchgoers and very, very strict with their religion. They were married in the Methodist church in Berry. A few years later, Dad said, I would like to go to my church as a family. So we then went to St Luke's Anglican Church, Berry, also Meroo Union Church, and we went for each religion on a Sunday afternoon for church, and we had Sunday school in the church as well.
And did you teach?
I did teach junior Sunday school for a few years.
Was that expected of you, or was it something you desired?
No, it wasn't expected, but they needed teachers. And as senior Sunday school at the age of 12, most of us took on teaching for a short time. Mum and her cousin Val Devitts and her husband Reg Devitts were the main instigators that ran the Sunday school. And then we had Sunday school picnics in the paddocks at Mr. and Mrs. Bert Muller and then Mr. and Mrs. Albert Muller's property.
Did it feel like a little village where you were?
Oh, yes. Functions in the hall, you could count on everyone from Meroo attending, whether it was for a dance, a farewell, a concert, which the school had a concert every year. We had Jack Abernethy on his piano accordion. Mrs. Debner would play the piano, and Vonnie Muller would be our artist with her beautiful singing voice. I actually went to her 100th birthday.
It would have been quite a few faces there, were there?
Oh, yes. There was only a few people that I wouldn't have known or hadn't seen for many, many years.
And how many people were there?
Well, I would say well over 100, because her extended family is just under 100, so 130 maybe.
What about your family? Were you musical?
No, definitely not.
Did you have a sense of history there with their house, Pomona, or did it feel like you were all part of something?
We went to Muller's very regular. We went every year to support Biggest Morning Tea. We went for picnics there. We also did silage and haymaking. So each family were connected or visited regular. Often went for suppers after milking, which you never hear of now.
Tell me how that'd work and did you have the phone?
We had Meroo Exchange, where you'd pick up your phone and dial to reach the exchange, and then Miss Marshall would put our calls through when we were children.
How would word get out about supper? It was just expected?
Not really. A lot of our suppers were at relations, and the only time we would see them would be to go for supper or vice versa, come to our place. But it was just a thing that we all did when we were in younger years. Because
it was free. You worked so hard and it was such a ritual. You can't exactly not milk the cows.
No, our only spare time was after tea of a night, because through the day it was all paddock work. So there was no spare time to go visiting. Our suppers were very special, and we got to meet friends, but we also got to meet our aunties, great aunties and uncles and cousins. And to this day, I remain good friends with second and third cousins, which is lovely.
And where would they be coming from and how?
Mainly from surrounding areas of Bomaderry, Bolong, Berry, Camberwarra, and they all came in with their 1950s cars. Christmas time, Boxing Day actually, on Dad's side of the family, we went out to Shoalhaven Heads for our picnic, and there would be possibly 100 turn up, and they'd come from Sydney down to south of Nowra mainly.
That would be on the beach, would it? Or
yes, where we used to gather is now a caravan park at Shoalhaven Heads. So it looks totally different. We were under the coral trees near the mouth of the river and the beach.
Did you have any special trees growing on your property?
We had a large orchard that had almost every variety of fruit and citrus, and our creek was lined with willow trees. The boundaries on Meroo Rd were pine trees, and we still have a couple of large bunya trees which drop the nuts every year. And last year we had 7 nuts fall. We actually stopped at the town in Queensland 2 or 3 years ago, but they couldn't give us a great deal of history why we would have them down on the south coast of New South Wales. The nuts are the size of a pumpkin and very heavy.
At school,
I went to Meroo Public School till 6th grade, and then I went to Nowra High School for 3 years. Both my sister Elaine and myself did our schooling without missing a day.
You loved school?
Yes, I did, because I got to see friends where we didn't on farms, because all our friends were mainly farmers and their parents never had the time to take us to play except on holidays.
So you weren't a netballer at Bomaderry?
No, I did very little sport other than at school.
Community at school? Your friends?
My friends, yes. And we were a quiet group of friends, and we did play our sports at school, but our main sport at Meroo School, and we went to Wollongong for the regions, was tunnel ball, and that was a favourite with all of us. And of course athletics, did high jumping, long jump, and of course the different lengths in running. And both my brothers enjoyed sport. Alan played football, John played a lot of tennis, and of course the tennis court was on Mulla's property, and the cricket pitch was on Mulla's property. I have the names of who owned the properties too.
Would you like to read it?
Fletchers Lane was named after the 2 brothers bought 2 farms, one on the corner of Meroo Rd and the other, the first farm off the Prince's Highway. David Fletcher purchased Maylands on Meroo Rd from 1919 to 1923. His brother purchased the Vaughan farm, which was the first farm down Fletchers Lane, in 1919 to 1927. When my grandparents moved to Bomaderry at the end of Fletchers Lane. They then sold there and moved to Maylands Meroo Meadow. My grandfather Fred and grandmother Evelyn were blessed with 4 children. Eric was the youngest. My uncle Carlton was the eldest son, and Les, and they had an older sister named Gwen. Dad enlisted in the Air Force at the age of 21 on the 25th of the 5th, 1942, and Les married and moved to Sydney, so grandfather had to require Dad back on the farm, and Dad was transferred to the reserve on the 16th of July 1942, so spent very little time in the Air Force, and he was aiming to be a pilot, so had to return to the farm. Grandfather lost his first wife in 1941 and remarried Gertie Lee on the 23rd of the 9th, 43, and moved to Glen Iris, Princess Highway, Bomaderry. Retired from farming due to ill health. Dad leased the farm from his grandfather from 1943. He and Mum met each other through their good friends Ernie and Hazel Hitchcock, who had their own farm in Devitts Lane, Meroo Meadow. At the time, Mum was living with her uncle and aunt, Albert and Grace Devitt, and they walked the hills on the side of the Camberwarra Mountain. Digging tussocks was one of the jobs. Of course, Mum was helping in the dairy and other paddock work. Mum and Dad married on the 6th of January 1944 at Bury Methodist Church, and later members of Dad's church, St Luke's Anglican Church, Bury. Dad and Mum worked as a team in dairying. Dad helped Mum on wet days by ironing. They leased the farm from grandfather till 1957, when grandfather sold Maylands to Mum and Dad. They were blessed with 5 children, Pearl, Elaine, Evelyn, Alan and John, and dairy farm till 1968, when they sold their milk quota, and naturally to cousins again, AF and B Garrity, and L Vaughan and their sons, and Mum and Dad went into beef cattle. While dairying, they did hay baling and silo harvest on farms from Broughton Village to Shoalhaven River. At the time, we had up to 7 tractors, and we were all driving the machinery from farm to farm. We were known as Pheeney's travelling circus. Due to Mum and Dad's health, Maylands was leased and then sold to Les and Rainey Vaughan and their sons, 1988. Dad sadly passed away in October 94. Mum remained in the family home with 5-acre lot. She sadly passed away there on the 3rd of the 5th, 2015. Current owner is Wade Wardell, who purchased the house and land in October 2016. Grandmother was a Vaughan that married my grandfather, and that's where the Vaughan connection is. The Vaughan farm was originally owned by David Fletcher's brother from 1917 to 1927 and sold to Dad's Uncle Fred and Auntie Ruby Vaughan at the end of 1927. They were blessed with 4 children, 1 son Les and 3 daughters, Mavis, Daphne and Beryl. Les was 2 years old when his parents moved to the farm. Les married Rainey Jorgensen, December 1949. Uncle Fred and Auntie Ruby moved from the farm in 1952 to Torreira. Auntie Ruby was the postmistress at Torreira for 25 years and retired at the age of 79 years old. Her husband, Uncle Fred, had just retired from the farm, and he worked for Auntie Ruby for 12 years at the post office. Liz and Rainey were blessed with 2 sons, Ron and Brian. The second farm down Fletchers Lane was owned by Limreys. Edgar and Irma Limrey bought their farm early in the 20th century. They were blessed with 3 children, Valda, Kelvin and Anne. Anne passed away at a young age of 12 from leukaemia. Valda married Harold McMahon, and they had a farm in the Camberwarra district. Kelvin married Colleen Cochrane in 59 and were blessed with 5 children, Stephen, John, Mark, Jeff and Janelle. Stephen's memories on the farm as an 8-year-old was driving a rotary hoe and unable to reach the brake pedal, of course, ran into the fence. Damage was his pride. They had a farm ute, an old Zephyr, where they farm bashed like many farm children did around the paddocks and had fun times. They lost a hay shed with fire in the 1960s. And another time his memory was when they were young teenagers. Their family home was 2 houses joined by a veranda. Stephen's dad, Kelvin, noticed smoke coming from the back house. He went to investigate and here were some of the boys smoking. So Dad quickly told us what they were storing in the second house, and one of the cans had dynamite. They were scared off smoking for a long time. Edgar and Irma's farm was sold to John and Flo Everson in 1979. David and Sue Boyd are leasing the farm and growing corn and oats for the last 10 years, and they store their harvest at their farm in Pereira on Jindy Andy Lane. And did you live at Hannigan's Lane?
Yes, bought there from the city at the end of Hannigan's, bought that Harry Bell's place. After a couple had bought it, we bought it off them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Harry Bell was Dad's groomsman and his wife Mavis was Les Vaughan's sister, which is a cousin. And that's how close the communities were.
That is right. And wouldn't it be great to do a community family tree?
Oh, it'd be...
That's what I'd love.
So interesting. Our next farm would be Shepherd's, whose farm is at the end of Fletchers Lane over the railway line.
Yes, so when is over the railway line is still Meroo Meadow or is that Bolong?
It was originally Bomaderry, and so was all Meroo Road was Bomaderry, and they changed it to Meroo Meadow around the 90s when we moved out to the farm and built. In 1984 our address was Bomaderry, and a few years later they changed it to Meroo Meadow again. I believe David Shepherd may have sold his farm to Region Irish Shepherd early in the late 1920s. Shepherds were blessed with 3 children, James, known as Jim, Yvonne, that was called Vonnie, and Pam. Their farm hand workers were Ozzie and Dorrie Gardner and their children. My memories from Shepherd's farm was Mr. Shepherd picking us up on his way to school at Meroo Meadow Public School, and Mrs. Shepherd had a dam on their property, a 1-acre dam with a small island in the middle of the dam. Our exciting outing was us children rowing a boat across to the dam island with our picnic lunch. We also had bonfire, or as known, Empire Night, and celebrated with a bonfire and a scary scarecrow standing on the top of the bonfire. And Meroo community would show off their fireworks and have a mouth-watering supper at the end of the night.
Did that island have a name? Did you christen it?
We used to call it Treasure Island. Mrs. Shepherd was well known for her dressmaking, a very good seamstress for many, many ladies and bridal wedding outfits throughout the Shoalhaven, and I was lucky my bridal gowns were all made by Mrs. Shepherd. When they retired, they moved to Bomaderry, and Ray Ison from Jasper's Brush and his wife Val bought their farm early 70. Mr. and Mrs. Shepherd were very good Christians and belonged to the Methodist Church in Bomaderry. Farm is now owned by Manildra, and their house and small acreage has been subdivided off the farm, and people by the names of Jarvis, Kane had been living on that property, also Mr. Goodall and family, Henry Goodall at this present time. The other farm on Meroo Rd was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Ernie Henry, and they moved there in the 20th century, blessed with 3 children, Dawn, Kelvin and Keith. They dairy farmed for many, many years. They also had Hereford cattle. The farm was sold to the new owners were Maury and Claire Dykes. They carried on dairying and beef cattle for the next 7 years before the farm was purchased by Keith Soper, and present-day owners, Alan Wallace and his late mother, bought the farm in 1975 and are still running. Alan is still running beef cattle to this day.
So tell me about how you met your husband.
I met my husband actually in a coffee shop in Nowra. Having seen him at the White Ensign Club, originally it was a hospital where I was born.
What was that club about?
For the sailors.
Oh, okay.
For the Navy.
Oh, it was a Navy club.
Yes. Ensign. ENSIGN. My husband's name's Ian, and he was born in Victoria and came from Adelaide to join the Navy back in
1964.
And we married in 1967 in October at the Berry Anglican Church and moved to Camberwarra for 18 months in what was a cook's flat behind a house in Tannery Road, then moving into a Navy Commission home in Nowra before building our house and moving back to the farm in 1984, where we are still living to this day.
Why did you go back?
We purchased our block of land that's subdivided. I was the lucky one that was able to move back home, virtually.
What about your children?
We have 2 children, Nicole, who runs Meadow Swim School now, and Donna, who lives in Catherine. She works at a special needs school doing HR work in the office.
And what about grandchildren? Do you have any?
We have 4 grandchildren. James is doing his last year at uni for a teacher. Jack lives at Camberwarra and he has a little son. So we have 1 great-grandson named Owen. Jack and Bree are due to be married in November. Then we have Hayden, who's had the open heart surgery and many operations last year, like 10 in Sydney. And he has moved to Catherine and he's like a teacher's aide at the special needs school, which he is thoroughly enjoying. He has only been up there a short time, but really enjoying his working life. Then we have a granddaughter, Jasmine. She is 15 in Year 10 at Bomaderry High School. She has health issues too, and she has NF1, which gives tumours right through her body and other issues, side effects from it. But in general, she plays sport, she swims, she plays AFL. She goes to Westmead every 3 to 6 months, depending on the tests they require. And her tests then go to Singapore and then on to America. So it's really hard to get results back in Australia through her specialists. But Westmead is incredible. She has eye tests and MRIs on her back and head. One of the many things that we did as a community was have card nights, and the card nights were often held on our front veranda, enclosed front veranda. At the Vaughan's house, they held dances because they had wide verandas around their house. Not sure how often, but I would say monthly. I didn't play because we had to do the drinks, which was tea and cordial, and pass the supper around. My parents were very, very involved in many community organisations. Mum was 50 years in Red Cross, and many years both Mum and Dad were in the Orange Lodge and the Grand United Order Fellowship Lodge, and both held positions in these both lodges. They also held positions on the committee of St Luke's, Berry and Meroo Union Church. We're in the Cheslon building committee. Mum was very good at cooking sponges, was her specialty. So she won many prizes in all the church fetes and school fetes. They also collected newspapers, and I'm not sure whether it was donated to the church or to the Cheslon Building Society, but I think it went to both. And in 3 to 4 months, they had raised $14,000 in recycled paper, which was mainly stored in the farm sheds at Maylands before Jimmy Harris from Berry came out to collect the papers and deliver them to the recycle. They did that for many years. We used to have to call on our way home from work at Cheslon Boundary to pick up papers on a certain day of the week, and we all had a timetable, and I found a sheet of paper that had where Mum and Dad had to collect the papers from Shoalhaven Heads, Berry and Shoalhaven area, and what day of the week and the time they collect. We stored the papers till a truck came to pick, and he would only come when it was a major load. Yes, people's homes and drop-off points at Cheslons and churches and
newsagents.
Wherever anybody said they would collect papers for Mr. and Mrs. Pheeney.
That was a lot of money.
A lot of money back then. Yes, in a short time, but they collected for many years. So over the years, I have no idea how many thousands of dollars that they collected.
And this is your parents?
My parents. And my siblings.
Thank you, Pearl Biggs. Your knowledge has certainly contributed toward a 20th century village history of Meroo Meadow. Pearl, like the other participants, has offered her private photographic archive and papers to be scanned for this project, which I start doing tomorrow. All the digitised sound and image will be logged and archived at our major state-based library, and where possible, locally as well. Quite a few seasons are planned on this side of the river toward this region's dairying and social history, but to date, the project remains unfunded. I am a professional historian, and I'm working without pay to achieve and capture this extraordinary knowledge and storytelling before it's lost forever, bringing the region into the 21st century by engaging with relevant digital technologies. I have secured 2 sponsors to which I am grateful that make a contribution toward production for this episode. Thank you, Turf Co., our biggest agricultural employer in the region, operating for 40 years, and McGoldrick's Real Estate in Berry, operating since 1987, securing our homes, farms and lifestyle properties, and who recently have come on board. I'm grateful to both Gavin and Tim. You can call me on 0415 900 320 if you'd like to explore being a sponsor and the benefits that my podcast may offer your organisation, or if you are personally motivated to assist in its longevity. Next fortnight I bring you episode 7. You'll know more as we get closer to the date. Thank you for your feedback when I bump into you on the street. It keeps me going, and you are so positive, and I know you're enjoying the episodes. A special shout out to Ed Watts, a generational dairy farmer from settlement out at Piree. Yesterday he gave me an Easter egg to keep me going because I said I was off to edit. His lovely wife Claire is our new pharmacist in Berry. Keep listening and spread the word. Much appreciated. Have a safe, spiritual and peaceful Easter.